At this point, the list of lolcows will keep growing indefinitely. There are and always will be people willing to make a fool out of themselves online, unwittingly putting their lives up to get picked apart by anonymous trolls. However, there's one name that dominates the category, and that name is Chris Chan. The degree of delusion, the sheer longevity, the funny and memorable moments, the rogues gallery of unforgettable trolls, and the volume of documentation. It all makes for the greatest lolcow of all time. Unlike other cows who become too belligerent for their own good and end up burning themselves out too fast, Chris Chan has been providing the community with a slow burn experience, with many people even finding themselves empathizing with him along the way. However, after the events that took place in mid-2021, rates of empathy for Chris Chan plummeted to levels that had never been seen before.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, girls and boys, and dudes of all teenagers. I am Christian Weston Chandler!
Chris Chan is an autistic person who dedicated decades of his life to working on media related to his OC, Sonichu, a hybrid between Sonic and Pikachu. As a consequence, an entire community of trolls and onlookers to his story formed around him, pioneering lolcow culture and dubbing Chris the most documented man in history. After becoming thoroughly unhinged due to the success of a troll campaign to convince him that the fictional worlds of cartoons and video games are all real and would soon merge into ours, Chris jumped the shark that separated him from being a lolcow to being an actual criminal when, in June of 2021, he allegedly had intercourse with his own mother. And I should clarify here, it allegedly happened not one time, not two times, but once every 3 days beginning on June 27th and only ending on July 30th, which means there were around 10 instances of it. Initially, he was self-aware enough to not tell anyone about this misdeed, knowing full well how people would react. And on some level, even he himself knew it was wrong, I think. Over the course of many years prior, there had been a lot of inklings that the relationship between Chris and his mom was odd, to say the least. For example, in 2010, in a call between some trolls that included Kim Wilson, a gal pal of Chris's, these things were said.
He's admitted that him and his mother spoon on his bed frequently. Chris has also said that he has had a dream about Barb, and in this dream, Barb is an Egyptian belly dancer.
In August 2016, Chris took to his Facebook to give his thoughts on an article about a mother-son relationship. Who among everyone in this world has not had a dream of being with one of their parents, never acting on them ever? I, myself, did have dreams of being with my mother. Although it is quite a controversial topic, there are circumstances where there would not be so much harm as one may think, feel, or believe. Plus, this offers a chance for better teaching the child how to better satisfy their eventual partners. In a tweet of Chris's from 2019, which he posted while role-playing as one of his OCs, Magichan, he said, "Admittingly, a waifu I had long ago, while they were still developing before Christine came around, were Robert and Barbara. Barbara was more of a guilty pleasure waifu, while Robert was quite a successful model amongst others in Dimension 1218. The reactions those posts got, along with his understanding of basic morality, however tenuous, let Chris know loud and clear that he could not be sharing any details about his affair with Barb with the outside world. However, his resolve wouldn't last very long, and he felt gripped by the urge to talk about it. He also felt gripped by something else, but if I think about it too much, I'll puke all over my desk." On the 2nd of July, he exchanged a few DMs with a troll of his called Sean, or the WCM, which read as follows. "I'm actually feeling really good right now. I hit the hay during the 10 o'clock hour last night. I had an extensive and lucidly clear dream, and I didn't wake up until about 4:30 a.m. I know why I'm getting much better quality sleep. It's been so for the past week. I have a sex partner. She has been very satisfactory. Her identity needs to remain a strict secret, and this is a mutual, genuine affection. I'm finally getting the long overdue experience, and she's helping me explore. Since we've started the ship progress with the first intercourse last Sunday, we're mainly still exploring the options and teaching each other up to when we find what works best. She is physically older than I am, considerably fragile, but she has great inner strength and soul power." The message is followed by one of those custom emoji things depicting Chris with a satisfied smile. When asked about how old she is, Chris replies that he can't be too specific, but that this mysterious lady friend of his is physically older. A day later, Chris talks about having bought a massage oil that he'd be trying out with this unknown woman. On the 10th, there are a few messages about a sheer gown called a negligee, which Chris repeatedly calls negligent, that he got from Adam and Eve, an adult store that he's a known client of. He tells Sean that he's planning to wear it to this next bout of fun with his partner. The next time a conversation between them got around to this topic was on the 14th, when Chris decided to share a few details about his partner. He stated that she was over 50, gray hair, blonde-haired, blue-eyed, and shorter than he was. Sean's messages read like he already suspected it was Barb, since after Chris confirmed his partner was in their 70s, he said, "Damn, so close to your mother's age." As time went on, keeping the information to himself was becoming too much to bear. He just wanted to tell the world about his new love. On the 25th, he sent a screenshot to one of his trolls of a Watch Mojo video he was watching called Top 10 Hottest Anime Moms Ever. It was only somewhere between the 27th and 28th that an outright confession was to be made to none other than Isabella Loretta Janke, a can of worms in her own right, one that I've covered in a past video. In this call, he decided to come clean and tell Janke these things.
How did you approach her?
Approached her with care and caution.
Hmm?
It was a time approach. So I just gave her comfort and talked with her, and we just branched out slow and steady, and then I encouraged her positively, let her make the first move. She wanted to do it. And
She did? Really? She made the first move?
Yeah.
Their conversation goes on, but the gist of it is that Chris copped to everything he was doing in full and just outright said, "Yep, me and my mom, we've been rolling around in the mud like pigs." In text messages he later exchanged with the owner of Kiwi Farms, Null, he reiterated this information, but with a few extra details. After referring to what he does with his mom as a romp in the hay and an extensive cuddle, Chris claims that the 8 guys who had been there before, including his father, Bob, were not doing it right. In Virginia, what Chris did to his mom is a Class 5 felony that can be punishable with up to 10 years behind bars. And it's worth mentioning Barb was already behaving very strangely, zombie-like as Chris described, which led many to speculate she was unable to even consent. Whether that was the case or not, a day or so after the information came to light, the police did a wellness check at their house, relocated Barb to a senior care hospital, and issued an emergency protective order to keep Chris away from her. Over the course of the following day, news about what Chris had done caught on like wildfire on social media, while he had to sleep in his van for the night. Null, who up until that point was trying to help Chris and even trying to get him money coming from a GoFundMe page that he'd set up for Chris, gave up on him after discovering that Chris had embezzled $750 from Barb's bank account. What Chris did, sending himself money from Barb's account, constituted a violation of the protective order, and the police were promptly notified. On the 1st of August, Chris got arrested and sent to jail, eventually being transferred to the Central Virginia Regional Jail, where he spent the next 20 months. Many celebrated, believing this to be the first step leading to Chris being permanently institutionalized, bringing an end to his recent reign of terror. As far as everyone was concerned, there was no chance Chris would get away with this. I mean, he admitted to it. The jail saga was going to seal the book of Chris Chan for good, and now it was only a matter of observing Chris quietly withering away in his cell until he eventually got transferred to a mental hospital that would end up being his final resting place. In its own twisted way, it was the fairy tale ending that Chris kind of deserved. He's just not fit to be in the general public. Regardless of how satisfied people were to see Chris behind bars, he was still very much a person of interest. Soon after his arrest, someone from 4chan's random board claimed to have stolen the license plate off of Chris's car. That same month, Chris made his first court appearance, in which, according to a local news article written about it, he interrupted the court proceedings to loudly exclaim he was famous on the internet, stomping his feet and demanding that they give him his belongings that were still at the house. "Your Honor, I'm a niche internet micro-celebrity, and I was going goblin mode." Later in August, a segment aired on Tucker Carlson Tonight covering Chris's arrest and how he could potentially be placed in a female jail. This marks one of the biggest pieces of media exposure that Chris has ever gotten. To make matters worse, as people were going around Chris's dwellings and scavenging for items they could resell on eBay, someone decided to go to his house, commonly referred to as the Temple. However, when this person got there, they found a lot more than a mere artifact. Barb herself was back at the house, which was shocking since most people presumed that she would stay in hospice care for a while or some kind of clinic, given her obviously deteriorated state of mind. Meanwhile, after begging for money so that he could buy things from the jail commissary and pay off his jail debt, Chris's next correspondence with the outside world had him comparing himself to Andy Warhol and Jesus Christ. Perhaps sensing that verbally expressing this perceived likeness wasn't enough, Chris urged the reader to use a visual aid. "Feel free to take any unaltered original photograph of my body's face, neck, and shoulder and chest area where I was not wearing the glasses. Then simply alter the photo to show a naturally growing beard, mustache, and sideburns. Now place that photo next to any image of Jesus on or off the cross. Compare. Look deep into my eyes and photograph. See for yourself." People have actually followed his instructions to very mixed results. It's more like Jesus with downs than Jesus. Extending his analogy further, Chris also compared Null to Judas since he was responsible for notifying the police of the embezzlement. Curiously, he also spoke of what he did to Barbara from the perspective of God. Emmanuel, God above all other gods and goddesses, and one of my mentors, herself, had deemed me to heal, cleanse, and and clear Barbara of all her past sins and regrets, and improve her abilities directly and personally as her goddess. We mainly cuddled, soul bonded, and talked. Consentful and emotionally and mentally supportive and healing, I did as I had done for and with a chosen few back in Israel over 2,000 years ago in cleansing them. Look, I'll be the first to say I'm no religious scholar, but I'm pretty sure in the Old Testament God wasn't cuddling with the Israelites. Also in September, a video from 2020 was leaked in which Chris is channeling Randy Stair, yes, the spree killer who thought he was a character from Danny Phantom, calling Randy his friend, which only makes sense given how parallel their delusions are, regardless of how radically different they manifest it. By the way, new video about Randy Stair on this channel very soon. The court appearance that month got delayed, and some fans ended up showing up to the temple, this time actually recording the experience.
Is Chris home?
I don't understand.
My friend Chris, I was just wondering if Chris was here.
No.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry to bother.
By October, Barb was turning 80, while Bob had already been dead for 10 years. If understanding what's going on in Chris's mind is nigh impossible for people who are young and internet savvy, imagine what it must have been like for them. Chris wrote many letters during this month, the first of which had him resisting an attempt to convert to Islam. Despite his resistance, Chris eventually says he ordered a Quran from the jail commissary, though the likelihood of him actually reading it is pretty low. In his next letter, Chris requests more money and a pardon from Joe Biden himself. He also reveals that his jail conditions are pretty good, even though he complains about the chicken there being too dry. On the 25th, he goes further into detail about how he's being treated, writing, "The staff treat me well enough. Then I've experienced the attitudes and bad habits from some of the real jerk-ops and really noisy neighbors after my body was relocated from medical to booking. But the food is mostly good, the commissary has good items on offer, and I've enjoyed the rec room a few times. This facility is 2 out of 5 stars." In the introductory portion of the letter, Chris actually mentions that Barb has written to him, but I haven't been able to find any further information on the communication between them. Just as November started up, Chris had a phone call, the contents of which have been uploaded to YouTube. In that same call, he draws parallels between his early life and Jesus's.
I mean, I foreknew and foresaw that I was going to end up in jail anyway. It was just popular amongst the other timeline.
On the 8th, he explains in a letter that soul bonding is as far as he went with Barb, which is as close to cunning doublespeak as Chris's mind can conjure. On the same day, Chris made a drawing titled Jesus Christ Chan Sonichu, which is beautiful. It should be in every Catholic church across the country. After Chris got another continuance on his trial, Barb got in a car crash after failing to yield the right of way, which isn't even surprising. In fact, my only real question is how is she even on the road at all? How had her driver's license not been suspended at that point? As a result of her accident, she got 2 broken ribs and a concussion, and her car was totaled. In a letter later that same month, Chris claimed he already knew this would happen and that the only reason she didn't immediately pass as a consequence of the accident was because he cleansed her. I guess you could say that. On the 6th of December, he makes a series of prophecies concerning whoever he considers the apostles of himself, or maybe apostles of his mom, considering she's supposedly the God that's above God. It's really impossible to understand what the hell he even believes in at this point, but regardless, his prophecies are mostly rehashes of Pentecostal Christian things, but filtered through Christian brain rot. During the merge, Christianese for the rapture, people will start speaking in tongues, and many people will suddenly disappear. Then, the veil that hides the truth will be lifted, and people's brains will start to burn from being overloaded with information. Somewhere in there, he also says animals will start talking, and I'm not quite sure why or how that plays into the merge, but maybe it's just like him wanting to talk to Sonichu. He further develops his theory that his healing saved Barb, saying that the reason he's in jail is because he took her sins onto himself, and now he's paying for them. In the same letter, he starts writing in gibberish, which he refers to as authentic Akashic? Akashic? Is this even a real fucking word? Oh, it is. Huh. Well, you know what? You learn something new every day. In the same month, he would update the 10 Commandments, seeing as times have changed since they were first created. And according to Chris, his updates will help human beings better understand the practices of magic, psychic powers, safer sexual intercourse, and soul bonding. Though he hasn't finished his update yet, he mentioned that he planned on making it into the 11 Commandments, which in my opinion, just isn't as punchy as the 10. In January, he made a couple of calls from jail, both of which have been archived and uploaded to YouTube. In the first one, he reveals he's been trying to get a hold of Barb to know no avail, as the 3 times he's called her, she never picked up. Because of his concern with Barb, he asked the person he's talking to call in a wellness check on her, since she's probably not doing well after Chris's departure. Not that she was doing great when he was there either. On the 18th of January, in another letter, after declaring his intent to go right back to the temple as soon as he's out, which at this point many people found impossible and thought would never happen, he revisited the old topic of his commandments. And I think now is as good a time as any to go into their actual contents. At this point, Chris had 15 of them down, though of these first 15, because yes, there will be more, we only got to see 11. The commandments of neo-spiritual Christianity, the official name of his religion, are mostly vague, secularized copies of the original ones. He barely made any changes to the more universally accepted ones, such as thou shalt not kill, don't steal, stuff like that. However, a couple of notable changes are that adultery is completely okay, well, and good, and that you are strictly forbidden from commenting mean things online. I mean, if nothing else, you can tell that Chris definitely wrote these. In the same letter, he expresses that the pieces of fan fiction involving Sonichu that stray too far away from certain core elements of the canon are making him very upset. So he lays out a few ground rules for them to keep them readable for children under 14. It seems like he's actually forgotten how many times he's put stuff into the Sonichu comics that violate these rules, but with the lack of effort and forethought he treats the comics with, it doesn't really surprise me. A day later, he added to these rules, saying that no authentic Sonichu issue was allowed to cover any of the events surrounding and following his arrest, and depicting Chris as overweight or merely mentioning it would instantly render a story not canon, toxic, and fake. In February, there's yet another continuance, and after turning 40 years old, Chris gets transferred to the Western State Hospital after being deemed incompetent to stand trial. Some people are of the opinion that despite his mental issues, Chris knew what he'd done and should be punished by the full extent of the law, while others say he was better fit for being permanently institutionalized. Either way, it seems like everything was going according to plan, and activity died down significantly until May when he returned to jail. As a result of the transfer, we get the only picture of Chris Chan taken for the entirety of the year 2022, and he doesn't look too happy in it. This may or may not have to do with the fact that, as he alleged in a letter from later that year, on the day he was transferred, the staff pinned him down aggressively, which reminded him of his childhood trauma of being held down by 4 or 5 people at school. However, since we only ever get Chris's point of view, we don't know if the staff was given a reason to do that to him, or if it happened at all. On the 6th of May, we got a few drawings Chris mailed to one of his followers, and 3 days later, another letter was sent in which Chris mentioned that the Sonic.exe creepypasta is officially real and leaking into our dimension. I already know that he believes that all fictional worlds are real, but it consistently surprises me how even the most ridiculous pieces of media get roped into this fantasy, and Chris never doubts it for a second. Due to his lifelong resentment for being considered mentally ill, Chris refuses to reveal where he was while away from jail. He also denies that he did anything to Barb, and in a passage in which he tells a biographical story of Barb's life, he makes a few claims about her that I don't recall him having ever made. For example, he says that she married his dad because he had a house and that she was emotionally abusive, threatening to do something drastic when Chris announced he was going to a convention in another state. Also, adding context to the accusations levied against Chris, he claims that all the way back in 2012, when he paid for the services of Mia Hamm, the Cherokee woman, to no longer be a virgin with rage, Barb supposedly told him that she would have done it herself. I should note that due to his lack of social acumen and extensively documented propensity towards lying, it could easily be the case that Barb said something more along the lines of she would have dated him herself if she weren't his elderly mother. However weird that still may be, it's not exactly a proposition like Chris is making it out to be, but you know what, I mean, it totally could be real. There are some other notable moments in the May 11th letter, such as his claim that Jacob Sockness, one of his more recent trolls, was responsible for cursing the world with the pandemic. And in a random pivot, Chris says, I had foreknown World War III as why My Little Pony Generation 5 being manifested in 2020 to 2025 was premature. In the same letter, Chris reveals the last known commandment of neo-spiritual Christianity, which commands that no one shall be pressured into having relations. In June, he gets optimistic about his release, expressing in multiple letters that he believes it's coming sooner rather than later. Eventually, he came up with a good excuse for having gone to the hospital, saying that he just went there to get educated on courtroom proceedings, which, yeah, I mean, that's definitely really true, right? That's why you go to the hospital. After repeating his denial of ever having been with Barbara, he goes on to explain what the soul bonding he did with her meant, only to say a bunch of vague, schizophrenic nonsense to obfuscate it. On June 5th, he makes a self-portrait of himself and Barb, surrounded by miscellaneous Sonichu-related characters. The isolated misery of Chris really shines through on this one. His case gets another continuance on the 9th, and a few days later, Chris claims that Barbara is no longer living at the temple. Though he doesn't say where she is or how he found out, he claims he'll be making a sacrifice to go home and clean since it's vacant. He then confirmed that his lawyer had been telling him he was going to go free soon, and that the police never even interrogated Barb due to her impaired mental state. Speaking of impaired mental states, Chris adds to the justifications for what he did to Barbara, saying that his cleansing had something to do with her eventually returning to the Rosachou form. He also says that he had visions of her going to jail instead of him for supposedly being negligent and mistreating the animals they had at their house, emotionally abusing Chris, and appropriating his SSI payments. While it's not hard to believe the first two, as far as I can tell, the third one is mainly projection, since Chris was the one managing their finances, if we can call what he did managing, so much so that one of his final acts before being jailed was embezzling from her bank account. And since we're on the topic of Chris's lies, it also seems he lied about Barb no longer being at the house and is simply trying to get her into a nursing home, but without any success thus far. On July 22nd, he specifies that the reason she's still there is simply because she refuses to leave, and since he hasn't been legally deemed as impaired, there's nothing they can do about it. Because of her lack of cooperation, Chris is increasingly upset about potentially never seeing his mom again, presuming that without the care that a nursing home would provide her due to her very advanced age, she's going to end up passing away before he's out of jail. Indirectly, by acknowledging that she's not all there and saying things like she's no longer able to drive, he's also suggesting that she wasn't really able to consent, whether he admits that happened or not. Chris's case got sent to a grand jury, where he would be tried for a felony. Afterwards, his lawyer filed for an autism disorder deferred disposition for Chris's charge, which basically means that, from my understanding, a suspended sentence, more commonly known as a probation, would be applied to the case. On the 10th of August, Chris's case is sealed, and his lawyer explains why. The unique intense interest in this case, including inaccurate online disinformation, required this infrequently used remedy. In our current age of unregulated online disinformation about almost anything and everyone, this remedy might be needed more than ever. To put it bluntly, his lawyer was mad at the trolls, not that the case being sealed was all that effective at keeping disinformation at bay, since the very same month after a judge issued a transportation order, memes about Chris escaping started making the rounds on a massive scale. Later in August, the CWC Wiki experienced a heavy outage that would last for the next 2 months, which was kind of poetic given the case was just sealed. Apparently, this happened because the CWC Wiki and Kiwi Farms shared the same server, and when Kiwi Farms was taken down, the CWC Wiki came with it. The thing is, Kiwi Farms was also one of the main hubs of Chris Chan news and discussion, meaning the internet at large was now in the dark, apart from a few smaller communities that are scattered across the internet who were jumping through major hoops to keep track of what Chris was up to. Besides having to deal with the felony, Chris's money started getting garnished over unpaid debt. As far as what Chris was up to, well, he was drawing this month. I'm gonna gloss over most of these, but I have to make a caveat here to show you this one, wherein he meets himself from the past and takes this opportunity to accuse Megan, one of the few people to ever be genuinely nice and patient with him in his entire life, of swindling him, putting her in the same basket as the trolls who were tormenting him around that time. It really goes to show that no matter how different Chris has become as his mental state deteriorates, to his core, he's the same Chris with the same petty Chris thoughts. As 2022 came to a quiet end with radio silence on Chris's side of things, 2023 began with activity from users on Reddit. As soon as it started, a few unrelated people happened to check up on the temple to see how it was doing after such a long time elapsed since Chris's departure. The first one was on the 14th, as someone on r/Chris Chan Sonichu posted about him and his friend going to the temple and scoping it out for a while until Barb came out to get some mail and went right back into the house. According to the post, she looks like a ghost, but was fully mobile and didn't show any signs of problems with her physical health. On the 22nd, someone else went there to take some pictures, which showed many of Chris's belongings had been thrown out, something he would undoubtedly be furious about if he knew. Meanwhile, the silence continued on Chris's end for the first 3 months of 2023. Things were quiet. Too quiet. Something had to be going on, and indeed, something was. Around 10 a.m. on the 27th of March, to the shock of everyone, Chris Chan was reportedly bonded out of custody, and a few hours later, the report was revised to say he'd been released. For all intents and purposes, Chris Chan was free to walk the earth. As expected, the internet exploded, in complete disbelief that what he did to Barb, and to a much lesser extent his issues with debt and embezzlement, were simply not enough to keep him institutionalized. The silence on his end is kept throughout most of April, with the exception of him drawing the cover of Sonichu number 82, which is a very strange decision given that the last issue before this one that was released was number 17. I don't have the slightest clue what led him to make this huge leap in the number, but given that doing completely incomprehensible things is Chris's forte, I'll try not to get too hung up on it. It's only in the first few days of May that he's actually seen again, emerging from the depths of the jailhouse and walking the streets like nothing happened. The first time he was seen in public again was at Walmart, looking significantly thinner and with his hair back to his natural brown color. According to someone who recorded a video of Chris at said Walmart, Chris asked for a flash drive and bought himself a new Nintendo Switch with God knows what money. It's unknown exactly where he resided at this point, with some people speculating that he was placed at a group home. The very next day, he was seen prowling in his natural habitat, a game shop, playing cards with people who were none the wiser. On the 3rd, more sightings take place, this time at another place he's known to frequent, the mall. For the time being, Chris remained without access to the temple or Barb, but people who visited it noticed that the lawn was being cared for, all but confirming that there were other people besides Barb frequenting the house and keeping it orderly. In the middle of the month, there were rumors going around that Chris had a new car, but again, it was a mystery how Chris could even afford that. At the end of May, we got witness testimony from a store clerk who had the pleasure of receiving Chris at his store and also happened to know who Chris was, who said that Chris was pacing around the place, talking to himself about things, and stinking of, as the clerk put it, pure shit, so much so that he had to breathe through his mouth. The image taken during Chris's stay at the store had a girl in the background who eventually found out she was in it and commented on it, saying he was taking ages in line as he was trying to find loose change all in his bag. I couldn't really smell him, so I guess I wasn't close enough, or all the essential oils in that store were clogging my nose. June of that year was uniquely quiet, and there was only one sighting of Chris going to buy ice cream with 2 unknown women, none of which were Barb. The next time he was spotted was in July, with his hair freshly dyed blue, and he had actually moved locations. Apparently during the course of this month, Chris relocated from his usual stomping grounds to Lynchburg, Virginia, where he was spotted playing card games and stinking slightly less than usual. In August, the judge in charge of Chris's case entered for a dismissal of the Barb-related charge, basically meaning that he would get away with it. Meanwhile, someone spotted him at yet another Walmart and had a chat with him about Sonic, and once again, he was described as consistently talking to himself while he walks around. It was during this month that Chris slowly regained access to all of his electronics, judging from his Pokemon Go and PSN accounts getting reactivated and having some activity. And then he gets his computers back, at which point he gets back on Twitter and starts liking posts, one of which is lewd MLP art that I won't go into detail about to save you all and your sanity. It appears that he'd kept a lot of the art he made during this stint in jail, since on the 23rd, his very first social media post in over 2 years was a big dump onto his DeviantArt, containing pictures of everything he drew while locked up. A couple of days later, Chris's case was officially dismissed, which he celebrated by playing Street Fighter 6 on his brand new PS5. I still don't understand where this money is even coming from. Where is he getting these funds? Is he in contact with like Bitcoin dono whales? He also got back on his Xbox account and sent one of his private correspondents, Helena, a DM, which was released. In it, he said, "Sorry for not responding, but I've been keeping a low profile as possible. Anyways, I'm not mad at either of you at all, and my online return is coming. And I allow you all to share this, as I know you're likely to do. I also enclose the following photo. Thank Critical for the really divinely inspired G Fuel. Be safe and well, you and everyone, with blessings." So I guess he's a fan of the moist Critical G Fuel flavor. Based. With his electronics coming back into play and him being comfortable enough somewhere that he could buy something as expensive and easily stealable as a PS5, some people got to wondering if he'd actually return to his house. I mean, there's no way that could be the case though, right? Certainly the cops or whoever was in charge of keeping Barb safe ensured that he could never get back there, right? Well, unfortunately, it wasn't long before Chris's car was seen on the house's driveway. There was a point in time in which people were laughing at the prospect of Chris ever being able to return to his house, but only because it seemed so unlikely, so ridiculous. It's unknown if Barb was there during Chris's presence, but this is as bad an omen as possible. It's also during this month that we get into more details about the women Chris was seen with after his release. In particular, the one called Flutter. During a visit of his to CVS caught on CCTV, Chris can be seen being generally touchy, even hugging and kissing her. The nature of this relationship was still a mystery at that point, but at the very least, we can be thankful that this woman wasn't his mom. For quite some time, the last video featured on Chris's channel was a clip of the infamous troll Anthony Legato screaming the name Julie, which is one of Chris's, I guess, ex-girlfriends, you could say. However, at the end of September, the video was taken down, signifying Chris had also regained access to his YouTube account. His Facebook was then unprivated, he got a new Discord username, and everything pointed to his imminent return and total CWC victory. Said and done, on the 16th of October 2023, his prophesied second coming took place in a video titled Jesus Christ Chan Sonichu Prime Resurrected and Returned, and it's about as glorious and theatric as we all imagined.
City of Quickville, on the road to the city of Quickville, the city of Quickville. Perfect.
Though Chris claims he edited this video himself, the semi-competent green screen usage has been speculated to be the work of a helper of Chris's who is a member of the Praetors, who is also responsible for running the official CWC Mart, which Chris advertises for in the description. The CWC Mart itself is an Etsy store where a number of items are listed, like an official Chris Chan Sonichu medallion, a Chris Chan 2021 Lost Commission, and a bunch of other just random items, one of which appears to just be a bag of rocks he collected from outside, which is is being sold for $15. What a steal. Judging from the segments of the video in which he was just speaking, it sounds like his diction has gotten considerably worse, proportionally to his general mental state.
You all continue to do excellent and very well. I know so, because I've got all these crosses on the palms of my hands and the images and the etchings of where I have been hung on that cross back in Nazareth many a millennia ago. See y'all later.
His return to YouTube is timed with more merch being produced for his store, meaning it's quite likely the only reason he started making videos again was to drum up attention and advertise for them so he could get some money. Obviously, his resurgence on the channel caused people to instantly start talking about what he did to Barb, prompting him to release a video addressing the allegations just a day later. For whatever reason, the background image he chose for this video is some kind of grand theater-looking thing, and I initially suspected he might have been looking for something resembling a court, then stumbled onto the theater thing and thought it was good enough. However, I was proven wrong, as he addressed this exact question on his Twitter, saying he deliberately selected the Royal Albert Hall for obvious reasons attached to this image. I don't know about you, but this doesn't exactly scream out obvious to me. In the video, he wholeheartedly pleads innocence and admonishes the trolls who are spreading fake news about him.
That's a mess of good grief right there. Why did y'all have to do that? You all really erroneously misunderstood me, period.
He then tries to flip the accusation around and say the trolls were the ones pushing for him to get into a relationship with his mom, which, in the case of Isabella Janke, is actually true.
You are the minority. You've written those smut fanfictions. You shipped me with Barbara. You shipped me with that Snowlands.
Maybe he thinks if he makes fun of his mom, it makes his case more convincing. There's a few notable things here as well. For starters, his eyes are glued to whatever notes he took for the entire duration of the video, probably because he's aware he'd get nervous having to freewheel the recording and would end up looking like a really bad liar. Didn't work too well though, since his defense from the accusation still feels extremely contrived. Chris is also a lot less concerned with keeping his voice in his fake high register in these most recent videos, often allowing his voice to drift all the way back down to how it used to be. A little later in the video, he starts talking about Isabella Janke.
Bella was the real sex criminal in that. She really wanted to try to get me in something. She's the real criminal. Fucking bitch! Calling her out! Call her out! Isabella Janken. She's the real sex criminal, period. She did a whole mess of adulteration and manipulation and things in her own words and attitude and insinuations and everything.
While I'm not sure what leads him to call her a criminal of that kind in particular, other things he says about her are true. She did want to troll him into going the Randy Stair route and leaving this dimension, to put it mildly. However, it's almost as if he was trying to conflate the troll campaigns he was the target of with what he did to Barb so that he can take himself off the hook for it. What's strange is that despite attributing his arrest to the efforts of trolls, he simultaneously says he purposefully allowed it to happen. I guess this is like his headcanon adjusting for something being out of his control, despite his delusion about, him being God. He's like, well, I let it happen. I may not have made it happen, but I did let it happen. Chris Chan, as always, sucking on a big old tank of copium. He also briefly speaks about the woman he's been seen with, but the only new piece of information he reveals about her is that she's 30 years old and got in touch with him while he was still in jail. I suppose Chris's autistic Riz became even more powerful once he became prison hardened. What can I say? Chicks dig a man who's done time. On the same day as that video went up, Chris paid for Twitter Blue so that he could have a check mark next to his name, displaying once again that regardless of what he's been through, he remains the same goofball from 15 years prior. He makes tweets complaining to Hasbro about the continuation of My Little Pony Generation 5, pleading for the return of Friendship is Magic, which he considers infinitely superior. Mind you, he got into MLP during the Megan arc on accident, as he was just trying to show interest in the same things she was into to win her over, but ended up becoming more obsessed with it as time went on. In a very funny turn of events, the next video he uploaded was Angelica Rosachu's Christmas Play Part 1, which is a rendition of the Nativity story with a full Sonichu cast. It starts with this bizarre low-resolution drawing of Angelica and a very eerie song that kind of reminds me of Everything at the End of Time. Before it gets into the actual play itself, Chris makes a disclaimer explaining that the reason the cast is almost all Sonichu and Rosachu characters was that they organically volunteered to be in the play. Not, I repeat, not due to some kind of segregation. It's very funny to me that he felt obligated to put that there. I wonder if he's still trying to beat the racism allegations from the attraction sign era, in which he excluded black girls from his dating pool explicitly. As for the play itself, it's mostly just a green-screened Chris superimposed on a snowy background to evoke CMOS vibes, of course, while he reads off his schizophrenic understanding of the nativity scene. Sometimes, when he's speaking from the point of view of a different character, a JPEG will flash on screen over him. Pretty subtle filmmaking. While I won't get into the minutia of every single part of this play, let me digress to tell you about the drawings that appear throughout them. Despite there being a sizable amount of them and all of them being listed for over $100 at the least, they've actually all sold, despite their abysmal quality. It's hard to believe that Chris is managing to monetize his own insanity in real time, and there's absolutely nothing that anyone can do about it. My personal favorites from this collection are the ones involving George Bush, for whatever reason. In both of the drawings featuring the ex-president, he's seen laughing at the part of the gospel in which Peter falls into the water for not having enough faith. And George is saying, "What could be wrong with my footing?" As the many different parts of the Christmas play are uploaded to YouTube, Christian is looking for skilled people to open a Minecraft server with. On the 25th of October, he announced he'd start live streaming, and no matter how much people were grieving for the fact that he was free, at least they'd get some content in exchange for his crimes against humanity that are whatever happened with his mom, and also unleashing Chris Chan into the general public. His first stream, aptly titled The Return of Jesus Christ Chan Sonichu Prime, and I say aptly titled because his neo-Pentecostal roots really start showing.
And there you go, first time online, speaking on tongues, because I have literally connected with the Akashic records and everything.
We get a few classic trolling moments as well. It's nice to know that no matter how far gone you are as a human being, a troll will always trick you into saying the N-word. Speaking of trolling,
Obviously try keep the questions general, good, safe. Why that gift of all gifts?
I have no idea why Chris thought it was wise to allow people to play GIFs on screen with donations. The feature is doomed to be abused by the toxics, as he would call them. While answering a question about how his jail experience was in relation to the one he had back in 33 AD in his previous incarnation, Chris gets briefly thugged and is asked a very inappropriate question.
It wasn't actually no different than... Actually, it was quite different as opposed to being buried than when I was Jesus back in Jerusalem.
For the record, that gif of the African-American gentleman looking quite distraught playing on the top right of the screen is the result of serious thug activities, sometimes involving corn, which I cannot display on screen, but basically the meme here is that it's funny to sneak that onto random people's streams, which has been dubbed thugging, though I'm sure that Chris had no idea it had even happened. Regardless of the people trolling him, the stream was a big success in his eyes, now sitting at a little over 60,000 views, which is definitely not bad. A day before Halloween, another stream went live, consisting of Chris reading some of his own literature. Like all of his streams, it wouldn't be complete without some trolling. Though I'll spare you from having to watch Chris defend himself against the allegations again, there is a portion of this stream in which he says that the Barb incident didn't happen, but he specifies that it didn't happen in this timeline. Maybe that's how he squares it in his mind and secretly believes he shifted into a different reality, effectively exonerating himself of whatever he did in the past timeline or something. Maybe we can get someone smart like Stephen Hawking to explain what this means in between his sessions of watching midgets do complex math equations on Little St. James. In his first stream from November, we see a return to form.
There is no Ian. There will be no addressing of anybody by the name of Ian because there is no Ian here.
It's very funny that Liquid Chris's troll campaign was so effective that the name Ian still grinds Chris's gears to this day. If being an accomplished writer and visual artist and being a demigod isn't impressive enough, Chris also proves himself to be quite capable at impressions.
I have 2 number 9s, a number 9 large, a number 6 with extra dip, a number 7.
Goddamn it, Kenny. Screen guys, I'm going out.
If you didn't catch that, those were supposed to be Big Smoke from Grand Theft Auto San Andreas and Eric Cartman from South Park. The most striking moment of this entire stream, however, comes near its end, as people were spamming "Chris is boinking the bar bussy right now" in the chat. Somebody makes a text donation that deeply disturbs Chris. A lot of people have read deeply into this moment, trying to understand what emotion Chris was expressing, with most concluding it was pure, unadulterated guilt. On the 7th of November, some pretty interesting news was shared on the subreddit when user TaxesTheft98 posted the following. I was working around 15 minutes away from the temple, so I stopped by to reminisce. Lo and behold, the new Sonichu car was there. I shit my pants in disbelief when Chris stepped out of the house with boxes to bring to the car. I got out, introduced myself, and made assurances that I would not take pictures. We had a 10-minute or so kind of awkward but pleasant confirmation. It was confirmed that Lynchburg is the new place of residence, but no other specifics were offered. Barb is still around and doing okay. It turns out that Chris was just grabbing some belongings and took Barb shopping earlier in the day. I did see Barb at the door and heard the bark and howl of an old beagle that I've heard so many times. There were no mentions of Sonichu or Rosechu, but we did talk briefly about the new Sonic Lego sets. Manifesting was brought up, and I was blessed, and we shook hands before I left. Overall, Chris seemed a little nervous, but maybe happy to have a normal and friendly conversation. I took no pictures, as I knew if I did, the conversation would be over, so you just have my word here. I'm still in disbelief over it all. Oh, and the medallion was being worn. Contrary to what many still thought at this point, there was no restraining order preventing Chris from seeing Barb, so in the future, it's entirely possible that another bout of cuddling may occur, and may God save Barbara if that does. On the 10th, Chris offers his very valuable services to Nintendo once more. If you're not aware of the deep lore, if I recall correctly, he's been tricked on more than one occasion into believing he was in contact with many representatives of Nintendo who were interested in making a game out of the Sonichu IP. Strangely enough, Chris thinks that his expertise in playing Pokemon qualifies him to work on the games. On the same day, he does a Q&A stream. For starters, Chris apparently used his healing powers in a pretty creative way.
Yeah, my autism for the most part has been cured. It's through meditation and affirmations.
You heard it here first, folks. Chris Chan is officially not autistic, or at least mostly not autistic, as he puts it. Later on, he's asked about which of his prophecies came true.
Which my predictions have occurred. I mean, you guys think, just think about it. There's a lot of predictions have occurred. I mean, just well, I prophesized in book 10, a lot of details have been manifested, literally. I mean, yeah, just look at this. We actually did have a virus that and that vaccine was developed for it. More recent years that end up going to the future for to get the cure for, and going back for the cure to prevent that happening on the C197 app.
If you got a migraine from trying to decipher his deep tism talk, don't worry, I'll translate. According to Chris, all the way back in Sonichu number 10, he foresaw the pandemic. However, upon further inspection, it appears he's referring to the part of Sonichu 10 where a vaccine is created to cure homosexuality. Not sure if that qualifies as a prophecy that came true, unless Bovid has been making people zesty this whole time, and apparently I just never found out, but I don't think it's been doing that. He also weighs in on a current political topic with a curious opinion.
Is right. Sonichu Prime is neutral, but we're siding with Israel, really.
He's already identified himself as the Old Testament God many times, so I'm not particularly surprised he's siding with the Chosen here. A day later, Chris tweeted about feeling woozy at times, which his friends chalked up to him undereating. For once in his life, this may actually be true, as Chris isn't exactly short, and he lost a lot of weight during his time in jail. This also brings up some questions about his physical health. While he seems to eat a lot of fruits, Chris is far from a healthy person, so it's worth wondering how long he'll last. As of the writing of this video, he's 41 years old. How many more good years does he have in him? 15? 20? I can't imagine how Chris will be if he makes it to his 60s, though it's a safe bet it won't be any better than he is right now. A couple days later, Chris once again addressed the topic of family love, though this time coded through Sonichu language. I would like everyone to refrain from their perverted and strange ideas and dreams about I and the Sonichu and Rosechu species and evolution lines. I do see all of you in your fiction writings, and I don't even have to consciously read them. How the smut fix, in general, with Sonichu Prime and Rosechu Prime with I, and even that which included between mother and daughter. I'm not defending it whatsoever. Congrats on discovering and manifesting distant alternate universes and timelines that need not exist or happen. The absurd is often appealing because it is unexpected and funny, but the ones who thought and or wrote and drew it out hardly have any empathy for those alternate universe individuals and their universes out of the multiverse that we reside in. Be careful what you think and or wish for. You might manifest that with yourself in the hot seat. Good luck with that timeline shift. Knit between the lines of that verbal diarrhea is the clear implication that by writing or drawing these things, people are bringing them into reality. Again, is this some kind of veiled way of shifting the blame to the people who were speculating about what he did with Barb before he actually, allegedly did it? As if it wasn't his choice to do what he did, but the trolls manifested it into reality? I mean, given the lengths that Chris is known to go to so he can evade blame for something, it wouldn't really be shocking to me if he literally ran into another dimension in order to avoid accountability. Soon after, he posts a video reviewing the comments he got on his Etsy page, starting the video out with trademark Chris Chan professionalism.
Once again, you can look at the Etsy store here and purchase medallions when they are in stock. Oh, pardon me.
By the way, I didn't turn the burp up for comedic effect. That's how it sounds in the original video. At one point, he reads a comment from someone calling him Ian, and it visibly still gets to him. Perhaps the strangest thing, though, about this video is the fact that Chris has been raking in thousands of dollars from selling merchandise. Can you imagine being like a normal cartoonist or someone that puts like effort into something when making art, and then you see that this Sonichu garbage is regularly pulling in over $100 a piece? I would be fuming. Then again, Chris spent 2 years in jail for boinking Barbussy, so I'm not totally sure that anyone should envy him. On the 20th, he does the first proper gaming live stream since his return, and the trolling followed suit. It's great to know that he's made peace with the pickle. Later on in the same stream, he denies having bought a PS5, which contradicts his PSN having shown him playing Street Fighter 6. Either he logged onto someone else's PS5 to play the game, or the more likely possibility is that he's lying so people don't think he's spending his money on useless toys. On the 27th, Chris's car was spotted in the driveway of a property on Big Island, Virginia. This house is owned by the leader of the Praetors, the main person organizing the business side of things. And though Chris may or may not be living full-time at the Big Island house, it's almost certain that he's been using it as his studio. I'll try not to get too sidetracked over Chris's orbiters, given the sheer volume of people doing anything in their power to write their name into Christery, but I do feel obliged to do it in this case. It gets a little confusing to continue with like the terminology here, since there are multiple members, so when I talk about the Praetors leader, I'll call him by his first name, Caden. All the way back in 2020, Caden, along with 2 other Proto-Praetor members, visited the temple to speak to Chris about a potential business opportunity. Showing a golden version of the Sonichu medallion, one of the members had handcrafted and painted with a paint that supposedly had 24 karat gold in it. Their idea was to use a mold press to produce Sonichu medallions en masse and sell them, giving Chris a cut of every sale for being responsible for creating the character. Despite his extensive history of being taken advantage of and tricked by trolls, Chris decided the Praetors were trustworthy, saying, "I could tell by soul reading them that their intentions were legit, honest, and true." Soon after, it was announced that the Praetors were going to start working on a lore Bible, presumably to not only compile, but articulate the properly insurmountable volume of schizobabble that Chris has spewed out about the dimensional merge. The Praetors were responsible for this now infamous sermon given at the Goochland Public Library. This picture, which is one of the most popular pictures of Chris ever, came from one of his interactions with the Praetors and not from his mugshot as many seem to believe. Even Isabella Janke, the aforementioned insane woman responsible for first divulging the news of Chris's misdeeds with Barbara, was briefly considered a Praetor. Besides maybe the idea guys who destroyed Chris's mind permanently with the merge stuff, the Praetors are the people most responsible for the way Chris's life is currently structured, but there's a little bit more to it than many people know. The reason why we're even talking about them in the first place is that around a month after the Big Island house Chris is currently working out of was bought, Caden was charged with 4 felonies for allegedly manufacturing, or growing, I don't really know what the right term is here, and distributing psilocybin mushrooms, which are very much illegal. Based on what I can glean from the legal documents attached to this case, although I should note I'm not very fluent in legalese, Caden pled guilty and was sentenced to 19 days in jail and 5 years of probation. This is relevant because Chris is in an extraordinarily comfy and financially rewarding situation, exclusively due to the structure placed beneath him by Caden and the Praetors, and if something were to happen to Caden or if he violated that probation, Chris would suffer the mother of all rug pulls. Maybe there'd be another benefactor to save him, who knows, but what is certain is that all of this stability rests on very unreliable grounds. But let's return to Chris himself. On the 29th, he communicates to his audience that he no longer wants to be seen as the old Chris, saying he doesn't want to be seen as bigoted in a plethora of different ways, he doesn't want to pine for the attention of girls, etc. Oh, and I guess it's important to note that he expresses this deep, heartfelt concern that he's being misrepresented through Family Guy fan art that includes Sonichu and Pickle Rick. You see, Peter symbolizes the old, always upset, virgin with rage Chris, while the new Chris is standing on the left, leaving the house house with Sonichu. I'm actually not sure where Pickle Rick fits into all of this, but I'm sure there's some meaning to his presence as well. I'm just not smart enough to figure it out. On the same day, he dedicates a post of his to address those on Kiwi Farms who are talking about him. I am quite aware that the intentions of those on Kiwi are not great. With that stated, I am more than aware, as I have made clear, of the likely usage of I as leverage in the popularity of one's content and self, as well as any lolcow content. I am not a lolcow, and I feel concern and disappointment with those who see others in their respective drama and stressful situations as comical. I feel pity for they who do not have empathy upon the pains of others, including myself, as well as not being open for the present and future better individuals they are more than capable of being in light, power, good, and righteousness. In general, I want it very clear that I humbly wish you all authentically have no intentions of making or promoting any mockery of I or anyone with disabilities or any aspects that may feel cringeworthy to you. I am not the lolcow that I was mislabeled as back in the late 2000s, and I do not identify as such. If you all would please, I am to be appreciated and understood as the more mature individual that I have become and shall maintain for my further soul searching, literal meditations, and even my psychic connections with literally everything there is, was, and shall be. Meditate on that for yourselves. I think the best way to articulate what Chris is saying here is that he's doing the same thing he's always done: complain about being trolled. However, post-merge Messiah complex Chris feels obliged to filter everything he says through an often biblical-sounding thesaurus vocabulary, which just results in him sounding like he overdosed on Thorazine. I suppose he believes that if he keeps saying, "I don't identify as a lolcow," people will just respect that. Unfortunately, the real world is in Quickville, and his status as not just a lolcow, but the greatest lolcow of all time is non-negotiable. After cooking Elon Musk on Twitter for no comprehensible reason, on the 1st of December, Chris gets tagged in a post containing fan art of Joshua Martinez. Since Josh is kind of deep Chris lore, let me explain who he is. When Chris was very young and still having trouble with being nonverbal due to his autism, he went to speech therapy, where he met another kid, Joshua, who was there for his very strong Spanish accent. This marks the beginning of Chris's lifelong appreciation for Spanish, which is evident in the fact that to this day, when he's going to call himself Jesus, he pronounces it as Jesus. Josh was one of Chris's best friends during his childhood, and after both of them left speech therapy, they remained distant acquaintances for the following years. However, in 2007, when Chris was starting to become famous online for who he is, Josh found out about it and became one of his earliest trolls, being the first person to ever catfish Chris. During the original Encyclopedia Dramatica page saga, where Chris made a series of Herculean efforts to try and get their attention off of him, Chris started bringing up Josh's name. You see, during this time, Chris believed the reason they were after him as hard as they were was that he was so self-evidently awesome and talented that everyone was trolling him out of envy. In order to dissuade them from doing so, he started saying Joshua was awesome and talented instead, saying that multiple famous female celebrities, which he referred to as were lusting after him. You can imagine how effective that tactic was. To say the least, Josh and Chris had a mixed history, and the fact that Josh trolled him so early on meant that he got under Chris's skin when it was still very easy to do so, and made his mark. This explains why on the 4th of December, when someone by the name of Plotistic posted fan art of Josh that made him look very buff and tagged Chris, he responded with, "Raffle, man, if you think Josh was built buff like Chris Evans or Lucas Lee, you're way off." He pretty much had a string bean build with some physical strength within it when I last saw him years ago. It's very odd to see Chris make fun of someone's appearance when he's so sensitive about his own, and will block and shut down anyone who tries to point out that his physique is far from what one would call graceful. A day later, Chris was once again spotted in public, this time at the Greene County Sheriff's Office, with his panties visibly pulled up to his belly button. Someone replied to the post speculating that he was at the sheriff's office in relation to his probation, or possibly to take legal action against the people who had been doxing him. However, the original poster explained what Chris was there for, saying, "The reason is neither. As far as my understanding, he was trying to reclaim items of his that the sheriff's office has in their possession." A little later, a completely unrelated person who happened to be in the MLP community made a tweet that read, "Repost if you are against predators being welcomed back into our community only because they apologize after getting caught." Quite the sensible position, and based on all of the freaks I've voluntarily exposed myself to in order to make videos about these people, I'd say it's a requirement for any functional community to get rid of those kinds of people. However, a day later, Chris Chan thought he should add his own 2 cents into the conversation, saying, "The misunderstandings linger from those who misconceive of others' intentions or lack thereof in pure accident or happenstance. Do not be closed-minded to apologies, and when one has authentically done nothing wrong or is not guilty of anything, especially after being proven this in court of law, they are to be welcomed back into society, period, without any further bias based on the past misconceptions. As for those who have and are, or have redeemed themselves proper, let them be welcomed. And if they act improperly again, then they are shown to require more time to meditate meditate and reflect for themselves. It's worth making a note here that Chris was never proven like not guilty in a court of law, although I guess he is still innocent until proven guilty. Really what happened was he was placed in an autism deferred disposition program that allowed him to basically be on probation due to his disability. Based on what Chris himself said in the letters while he was in jail, no one ever talked to Barbara, and I doubt the audios of Chris confessing to Janky were ever brought up at all. As a matter of fact, the tweet he's replying to is talking about people who apologize. But has Chris even apologized? He's just been claiming he's soul bonded with Barb. He's never apologized for anything as far as I can tell. In fact, he goes back and forth between denying it and then simultaneously being like, but if someone did do something like that, it'd be fine. The gif attached to this tweet is an anime guy getting punched in the face so hard that he flies away. I don't really know why that is. I can't explain it, but it's there. On the same day, Chris makes a hard pivot to talk about Rick and Morty, claiming that the night episode of the 7th season is accurate in relation to the dimensional merge. A couple days later, he drops new video content. 2 shorts uploaded in reverse order called Toys for Tots. Doesn't seem he understands the concept of shorts too well though, since the 2 videos are actually one long video split in half, and it only makes sense if you watched both. But again, they're posted in reverse order because he uploaded part 2 before part 1 when he could have uploaded one regular video instead. In it, he complains about people taking pictures of him when he's out in public as if he's Bigfoot, but I'm not sure why he's only expressing his disapproval of people doing that now, given it's been happening for months, but maybe he only just realized. On the same day, Boogie2988 tweeted out celebrating his 6-month anniversary with his girlfriend, to which Chris replied, "I for one appreciate and like seeing you both content and mutually appreciating each other as soulmates. It is very good." Is getting a relationship blessed by Chris a good or a bad thing? What kind of abyssal energies can you be accursed with if the power of Sonichu starts acting on your relationship? Soon after, Gino Samuel, the person responsible for documenting Chris's entire life over the course of dozens of long-form videos on YouTube, replied to someone tagging him showing a 3D printed Sonichu medallion alongside a certificate of authenticity. Chris passively aggressively responded to Gino's post, saying, "Gino, don't even with the certificate. 3D printed never surpasses the full soul effort in handcrafting. It's not funny." This is funny because Chris is the last person on earth I'd expect to be an art elitist, since the quality of his drawings of Sonichu have remained steadily awful ever since he began making them. I guess this is another instance of Chris's fixation on his characters being represented the right way by his standards, similar to how he got really mad at Sonic's arms changing colors at one point. Another of his fixations, as mentioned previously, is My Little Pony, specifically the Friendship is Magic show, which he's been prophesying will be uncanceled and resume soon, just about any day now. Probably when the merge is complete. In another tweet, he says that it shall be done by divine intervention and command. In his mind, he says that MLP Generation 5 has simply taken place too early in this timeline, and it must be corrected. I'd expect him to have already corrected it by now, given that he's supposed to be God, unless MLP falls outside of God's purview, which is somehow not that far-fetched of an idea. On the 16th of December, an employee of the local UPS notices that Chris is at his workplace and takes a picture of him through CCTV. Despite the camera's very low resolution, Chris Chan's appearance is so recognizable that you can tell it's him with barely any visual information. The lanky legs with the tube socks, the scuffed gym shoes, the jean skirt, not to mention his barrel-like disposition and dyed mane. He's got a recognizable look, you gotta give it to him. No one else can steal that Chris Chan swag. A few days later, Chris puts up a new video on the YouTube channel that consists basically of him playing with his Transformer toys and making them dialogue with one another.
Young warriors! Listen to me, young warriors. There's a lot more to this than merely what meets the eye.
This video sees the revival of one of Chris's oldest Sonichu concepts, the private villa of corrupted citizens, originally created to house his trolls and the evil witch Mary Lee Walsh, who was the dean at his community college who kept taking down his attraction signs. A day later, he's spotted again, this time at an airport with his girlfriend Flutter. The person who posted this sighting to Reddit mentioned that Chris was on the same flight as they were, from Charlotte to Richmond, Virginia. I have not been able to figure out what he went there for, though the 2 most likely candidates are some kind of convention or a business-related meeting. He's seen with Flutter again the next day, wearing an alternate version of the classic. According to the person who posted the images and was seeing Chris and Flutter interact from up close, despite her appearance, she was the one keeping Chris at bay, who apparently was making trouble in the restaurant they were in. Not only was she the one paying for the meal, which Chris allegedly consumed like a child, but he kept trying to talk to random strangers and bothering the staff while Flutter pulled him away. On December 22nd, Chris does his last stream of the year, coloring the special Sonichu No. 0 HD edition. As of the writing of this video, the last time he was spotted wanted was in another state entirely, North Carolina, in the town of Cary, picking up tickets for the Animate convention, which is going to take place in Raleigh. Despite the great fear that overtook people when Chris was released for allegedly having done something unspeakable, the people around him have proven themselves decent at keeping him at bay. On the other hand, it's great that Chris hasn't become a roving maniac wandering the streets prowling for Barbara lookalikes to soul bond with non-consensually. However, how long can that last? How long until the Sonichu Containment Support Circle breaks? Some have brought up ethical questions in regards to the Praetors making money off of the medallions and merch, since Chris is technically disabled and potentially evil. But perhaps a better question is, how ethical is it to do any business with Chris, given what he allegedly did to his mom? There's really no telling of how all this will turn out. Only God knows. And by God, I mean Chris Chan. With that being said, thanks for watching this video all the way to the end. I've been Turkey Tom, and until next time, leave me alone.